Hi, I'm Peter and welcome back to History and Sabre, the channel where I talk about HEMA, history and swords. This is part 2 of my ongoing video series on Austrian and Austro-Hungarian military sabre sources of the late 18th and mostly 19th century. Now we're picking up where we left off last time. Here's 5 more manuals that I'd like to talk about today, and again, quick disclaimer, I am mostly focusing on cut fencing again, but of course it is possible that some of these manuals do contain some sections on thrust fencing, bayonet fencing or cavalry stuff as well, which is fine, and I'm going to be mentioning that as well. So let's dive right into it. Here's 5 more manuals in chronological order. Let's go. So the first manual I want to talk about today is by a cavalry officer called Constantin Balassa, and in 1860 he gave us a manual entitled Die militärische Fechtkunst vor dem Feinde, which roughly translates to the military art of fencing when facing the foe or the enemy. Now, this is quite dramatic, but he actually makes a point of having removed all cuts, parries and thrusts that are not useful when facing the enemy, and he's removed everything that is used in so-called Kunstfechten or art fencing. So fencing for leisure, if you will. So the interesting thing here is that in decades prior, he already published some manuals, albeit on horsemanship. One is about horseshoeing and the other is on the taming of horses or training of horses. And this ties in really nicely with his bayonet method presented in this manual, which I'm really a fan of because he says he was assigned to a garrison as a cavalry officer in order to oversee the taming and training of the horses for said garrison. And when he was there, or while he was there, he had the chance to train with the bayonet almost every day, and he devised a method that he presents in his manual. So it ties together really nicely in the introduction. One more funny little nugget about that here. As you can see, he teaches a normal lunge with the bayonet, and on the next plate he shows a passing step and a stretched out hand to maximize reach. So in a HEMA context, in sparring, people often do that with polearms or bayonets, musket and bayonets. So if you see that, it's historical and you heard it from me first. So as to the contents of the manual, he focuses on bayonet versus bayonet, saber versus saber, and also cavalry lance against cavalry lance for the uhlans. Before we move on to the next one, let me just quickly say that I am currently in the process of transcribing Balassa's manual for the public. So if you're interested in a easily readable but faithful transcription of this manual, check back later this year. I will link it down in the description when it's done. So the second manual I want to talk about today is by August Hermann, who was an Infanterie Hauptmann or infantry captain, and we already talked about this guy last time. He wrote a manual in 1859, which I talked about in my previous video, and this one is a more recent and more complete version of Hermann's manual, because it also includes thrust fencing, Rapierfechten as he calls it, as it was called at the time. Now, just like his previous manual, it was meant for officer training, for officers' fencing schools. Now, for all you non-German speaking people out there, there is an English translation available on Amazon by Richard Barbary, and I put the link down in the description box for you to check out. Okay, so the third manual I want to show you today is by a guy called Karl Albanesi, and this guy was instructor at a medical university or medical faculty, and it's a very detailed fencing book, and it's entitled Theorie der Fechtkunst nebst einer Anleitung zum Hiebfechten und zum praktischen Unterrichte. So Hiebfechten, cut fencing, it focuses primarily on cut fencing as the title says, but he also includes remarks on the rapier, so thrust fencing. And he also shows some quite nice plates at the end of the manual itself. And also he has some very nice master-pupil drills at the end, like some of you may know from Hutton, for example, that round up this nice and very, very detailed and long fencing manual. So it's a nice one if you want to check it out. The link, as always, is in the description for all of these manuals. So the next manual is, again, 1 year later, 1863, by a guy called Alexander Edler von Metz. So he was an infantry captain as well, or I don't know infantry, but it says Captain Hauptmann. So he wrote this manual that's not in German typeface or black letter for once. So those of you who don't really like to read or are not as used to reading black letter, this one is printed in a more modern font, which kind of sets it apart from the others that we've talked about so far. And it's also a very structured saber fencing manual for the Primauslage, so for fencing from the Prim Guard, which it shares with many of the manuals of this era. It includes loads and loads of drills, so the whole system is broken apart into partnered drills and practical application of the cuts and parries and ripostes. So if you want to check it out, again, it's down below, and I kind of like this one. It's a nice one. And also, in contrast to the previous ones, it does not include a section on thrust fencing, so it's purely a saber fencing manual in that sense. On to the next one. So the final one for today is by Raimund Sebetić, and this one is from 10 years later, so we're in 1873 now. This one also focuses on saber fencing and not on thrust fencing. It also gives a lot more context to fencing history and also to the state of fencing at the present in 1873 in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And it is also one of the manuals that was officially recognized to be used at military training academies. So Sebetić also goes through his manual with loads and loads of drills and partnered drills, just like the one before. And the interesting thing here is that he also has a section on sword versus bayonet and sword versus polearms in general. So he has a focus on that as well a little bit later in the book. And also he talks about fencing salle etiquette. So no hats indoors and stuff like that. So if you're interested in historical fencing etiquette, this one is also a book to check out because he does mention stuff like that as well. So that was our 5 manuals for this video. Next time we're going to look at 5 more, slowly approaching the end of the 19th century, slowly but surely going into the 20th maybe. And I hope I could show you some manuals that you maybe didn't already know. I know I focused a lot on Balassa in the first part of this video, but that's just because I know it best because I'm transcribing it at the moment and I'm really a fan of the manual itself. So thank you so much for watching. Please leave your comments down below. All the links to the manuals mentioned in this video are also in the description box. On that note, thanks again for watching and see you in the next part. Thanks, bye bye, and see you.